What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today we're doing another, actually this is kind of a slightly different video, but it's going to be another draft related video here in Madden 20. And today we're actually going to discuss something that someone left in the comment section on the last video. So shout out to Charles Zeidsyke, I think is how you pronounce his name. I apologize if I got that wrong, but he left a comment on the video essentially detailing why you want to pay attention to height and weight, especially for defensive linemen and outside linebackers, because depending on their weight and their height and things like that, they can be good at different positions. So I want to break that down a little bit further and kind of discuss why you want to pay attention to the height and weight of players when you're drafting them in Madden 20. And it's not necessarily to determine whether they're going to be good or not, but more so to determine if you could take a player and play him in a certain place for your team. So what you'll notice when you look at players across the league, when you look at defensive end players, they're all going to be, you know, in the 250 to high 200s range in terms of weight. Very rarely you'll find some heavier defensive ends, maybe some 3-4 defensive ends, which are more of an interior type of lineman, guys like Stephon Tu or Akeem Hicks, that are honestly more of a D-tackle type of player. But for the most part, you're going to be finding guys that are in the 250s, 260s, 270s, all the way up to about 300-pound range. And so that tells you a little bit of something in terms of that position. Whereas if you look at D-tackle, you're going to be seeing guys that are all above 300 pounds, approaching 350 pounds in some cases, like Michael Pierce. For, you know, true run stoppers, Damon Harrison, 350, or Damon Harrison, I don't know if I pronounced that incorrectly. I think somebody commented that I pronounced that incorrectly before. Vita Vea, so on and so forth. So you have to pay attention to the height and weight of players, because again, if you go and look at guys like outside linebackers, if you're looking at 3-4 outside linebackers, pass rushing outside linebackers like Khalil Mack or Von Miller, they're going to be in that 250, 260, 270 range. You know, let's say we look at TJ Watt, 252, Zadarius Smith, 272. Guys that are pass rushers like Von Miller's, Chandler Jones, they're going to be in that range. And so what I want you to know, and what I want to emphasize that person commented on the last video, is that when we look at players in the draft, we can determine whether players can play multiple positions or not. So if we look at the defensive ends in this draft class, you know, let's say I find that there aren't very many good outside linebackers. Let's say I run a 3-4 defense and I really want a good pass rushing outside linebacker, and I just decide none of these guys are good, or there's nobody here that I'm going to be able to get that's going to satisfy my need. What I can then do is I can then look at the defensive ends and I can say, oh, well, look, Nash Bradfield is 6'2", 244, and Tony McHugh is 6'2", 255. So they really fall into that range of a pass rushing outside linebacker, a 3-4 outside linebacker. Now, if their combine grade matches up with that, if they have a decent 40 time and they're athletic like Nash Bradfield is, and Tony McHugh here also is, he's got a good 40 time and he's relatively athletic, then these guys would probably fit in pretty well as a 3-4 outside linebacker because of their weight and their height, and that can kind of tell you something. So knowing height and weight of these types of players can help you big time, because, you know, let's say it's a really weak linebacker class, but you need to address that position in the draft. Well, you can look at defensive end and take these guys and potentially play them at outside linebacker, because realistically speaking, that's what happens to players all the time when they get drafted to the NFL. If they aren't the right size to play as an interior defensive lineman spot, they'll bump out to the edge, or if they're an edge player, they might bump to a 3-4 linebacker or something like that will rush off the edge but doesn't necessarily have the same size as a defensive end. Likewise, you might see guys like Casey Pierman. Let's say he was really good and I needed a D-tackle, and there weren't very many D-tackles in this draft, but this guy's really good. Maybe he had a first-round grade or something like that. I could take him and probably pretty fairly move him to D-tackle because he's over 300 pounds. He kind of fits that bill. And what you should know is that this does apply to other positions. It applies from corners to safeties and things like that. You know, if you get a kind of a bigger-bodied corner or something like that, they might be able able to play safety because they might be able to tackle and things like that. Likewise for other positions, like on the offensive line, if you get a really tall lineman, like for the most part, centers and guards are relatively short, 6'4", 6'5", maybe even 6'3" for centers. But like, let's say for some reason you get like a 6'7" center in here at one point, they might be able to bump out and play tackle because of the fact that they're 6'7", and that kind of lines up with a true tackle size. And so that can give you some indication. If you pay attention to the height and weight of players, it can give you some indication of where you can move players to, and that'll give you versatility in the draft. If you really pay attention to those things, it could really help you out, because I can't tell you how many times there have been cases where, we have a bad linebacker class, but I still need a pass rushing outside linebacker. I need a guy that can play that position, and so I just take a guy like Tony McHugh that has a good 40 time, that has good grades across the board, has good finesse move, looks like he's athletic, he fits the size bill of an outside linebacker in the 3-4 system. I'll draft him and move him to that outside linebacker spot. Now, this isn't going to be a perfect system. It's not going to guarantee that that player is going to play well there, but it is an idea that, you can take a guy and move him from one position to another without too much of an issue. So definitely keep those things in mind. I would say it applies heavily to, defensive linemen, linebackers, offensive linemen, maybe defensive backs a little bit. You could probably get away with, let's say you found a really small free safety that might be really athletic. You could probably get away with putting them at corner, like a guy like Donovan Meeks. He might not play that well as a safety because he's a little short. I mean, he is kind of heavy, but, let's say you find a guy that would probably fit the bill of a corner better. You could draft that guy and move him to the cornerback position. So keep in mind the height and weight of these players. It's not going to tell you necessarily whether they're good or not, but it's going to tell you whether that you could move them to a position that could help you. And I see it all the time with my friends. They're like, I needed an outside linebacker, but this draft didn't have outside linebackers, so I went in a different direction. I drafted a position that I didn't need. Well, you don't have to do that. You could still draft a left end, and, there are guys here, like I'm looking at right here in this randomly generated draft class, that these guys could go and bump to a 3-4 outside linebacker spot without any issue. So shout out to the person that left that comment on the last video. Hopefully this video helped you guys out in some way. It is really useful information to know to help yourself out, to be more versatile in the draft and get the best bang for your buck. If it did help you out in some way, make sure you leave a like on the video, comment down below with what you guys would like to see next, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you guys have a great night.